going to be one of the people walking you through today. I've also got Mason joining us.
Let me just test my microphone, make sure you hear me all right. Josh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great,
yes,
great.
We can hear you, Mason. Great, so let's have a look at the agenda that we're going to be running through today. So we've got 5 things today. The first is going to be a bit of an overview of the API documentation that's available for you on the website. The second is Mason's a bit of a brief discussion running through sort of our background and considerations for creating the API for Comet. This was something that we put a lot of priority and attention to when we were looking at architecting Comet out at the beginning. The third is we're going to be jumping then into the live examples. So the first is going to be looking at creating basically a custom usage report, or a lot of other people sort of refer to it as the billing report. After this, we're going to be doing another live example, and that's going to be building a sign-up form, which is something that we get asked a lot. So Mason's going to walk you through the basics of creating that sign-up form and how to do it with the API. And then this out is going to be a Q&A. So during this chat, feel free to submit your questions, and at the end we'll go through and answer those for you. I am mindful of time, so if there are a lot of questions or questions that we can't answer during this, we will follow up with you directly after this webinar with the questions. So I think that's enough for me, and now I'm going to hand you over to Mason and let him get started.
All right, so thanks. My name's Mason. I'm a developer with Comet, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of the API and dive into some live coding demos. So you should be able to see my screen now. Yep. So Comet Server is a relatively new product. Since we started development from scratch, we got to pick some modern technology to build it with. The web interface that you're seeing here is the Comet Server. This is what's called an SPA, single page app, built entirely in JavaScript. So once this login screen has appeared, what you're seeing here is a fully loaded web app. And from this point on, all it does is make API calls. So if I log in, that's one API call. We've got the home page. I think one API call for each one of these charts. Get the latest news, one API call. And these are all API calls that you can make yourself. And then our backend server is developed API first. So that means our API is always up to date with all the product functionality. That's kind of a key concept. So I'm going to demonstrate that by opening the Chrome Network Inspector and clicking around a little bit. So if I go to the user list page, we can see there's 2 API requests and a font. So 2 API requests. Admin list users full and admin dispatcher list active. What I'm doing here with the network inspector is not scraping. Normally, if you do this to a website, it's very fragile. You have to worry about every little change the website makes. But with Comet, this is not fragile. This is not going to break. The Comet app also does some of the same API calls, and we need to support you MSPs using older versions of the app. So the API methods, we basically promise to keep them around forever and compatible forever. So don't be afraid of using the network inspector and see how our web app, the web interface does it, because all of these API calls are fully supported and documented. And let's go into that. Let's use the documentation to find out what these 2 API calls do. I mean, for list users full, you can probably guess it's going to be something about listing the users. But so just bringing up the Comet documentation on our website. Go to the API reference, and I'm just going to search for admin list users full. And there we go. So list user account profiles. So we've got one API call to list the users and their profiles. Well, obviously the users page is going to want to do something like that. And then we've got another API call, which was admin dispatcher list active. List the live connected devices. Right, and of course the users page needs to know the online, offline, live connected devices for things like searching, and there's a little badge that shows your online devices and things. So Right, so users page, 2 API calls, easy. We've got quite a lot of people on this webinar. Presumably you're all here to learn about integrating Comet into your own sort of websites and apps and workflows. So let's try it out. Let's try to use these API calls ourselves in our own code. So what we've seen here in the browser, these requests, let's try and replicate them outside the browser. So on our documentation, this is sort of the detailed reference. We also have this guide with sample code. And we've got sample code for curl, PHP, Go, PowerShell, VBScript. There's a lot of different programming languages in the world, and your favorite one probably isn't here. The samples we've got here are basically just languages that we use in-house, and also, you know, some common IT scripting languages. But the API is JSON over HTTP, and any language under the sun can do it. So if you're using Python, C#, Ruby, Node.js, Rust, Haskell, you just look up how to do JSON over HTTP, and everything will just fall into place. Let's start with curl, because with curl it's a one-liner to make an HTTP request. So I'm just going to bring up a terminal window here, an empty folder. So curl, I want to go to my Comet server. And then the API we're looking at is this path. Now when we make, so that's pretty much a URL. We also need to supply it with some authentication data. So every app is authenticated, and right now I've got a blank Comet server, so I'm just going to use, you know, when you first install Comet server, it's admin to log in. I'm just going to do the same thing here. So username admin, auth type password. So, you know, Comet server, we've got TOTP, two-factor, YubiKey, U2F, session keys, password. We'll just stick with password for now. And that should give me a list of my users, and there we go. Test 2 and test 3. Of course, that matches exactly what we've got here in the Comet server interface. Now I used sort of admin, but maybe you want to create a separate user account for making API requests, so you don't have to put your password in your code scripts or anything like that. Yeah, so supply your parameters, hit the API, very straightforward. Now, most people aren't using command line curl to make big app websites, so let's move on to PHP. PHP's programming language, came out in 1994, seems to go through cycles of being popular and unpopular, but right now, PHP 7 is one of the fastest runtimes around. Modern PHP with Laravel Symfony frameworks is like a completely different language. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to do the absolute simplest thing here that could possibly work. And of course, this is just a demo. You can adapt these ideas to any framework or programming language. I'll make this a little bit bigger. I don't know if you guys are watching zoomed in or anything. So I'm just going to get a PHP environment up and running. 9961. And here, so that's my hello world. So I've got my, I'm ready to write PHP. First thing I want to do is just grab the sample code, PHP. Just going to copy paste that, and then we'll talk about it. I need to change a few things here because my Comet server is using 9960. So that's the same URL. We're just going to hit that same URL. HTTP post request, username admin, password admin, and then some extra stuff. And so I should be able to hit this web page and get there you go, and 3 users. Great, so we're in PHP now. Unfortunately, you know, this was one line of curl, and here we are with PHP. It's 16, 17, nearly 20 lines of code, and I'm not even doing anything with the response yet. I could put this code in a function and reuse it and go from there, but actually I'm going to save time and pull in our library that's already done that. So library management in PHP. It's 2018, so we're going to use Composer. In the past, PHP had something called Pair, but it's 2018, so Composer. If you're familiar with other programming languages, in C# you've got NuGet, in Python you have Pit, Node.js, NPM, Rust has Cargo, PHP has Composer. It's just a normalized way of managing your dependencies. So I'm going to enable Composer for this repository. And then download and install our library for accessing the Comet server. And this is just going to take 5 seconds while Composer figures out all the necessary dependencies. Cool. Re-enable the PHP web server. So this is our 20 lines of code here. Let's dramatically simplify it. One line to connect to all our PHP classes, and then we can start doing cool things straight away, like, for instance, no. Yeah, let's found it. So now we have, using our library that's publicly available, we've got auto-generated classes that cover the entire API surface. So I can very easily do the same thing here. That gives me a Comet server object, and I can do something like this. Admin list users. I'm just going to display it and hit that web server again, and there we go, straight. So same 3 users. Same 3 users, except by using this library that we've got for PHP, I've taken those 20 lines and turned it into what's basically 2 lines. And just having that done for you is just going to make moving to do more complicated stuff, like building more complicated stuff on top of the API, just a little bit easier to work with. So we've got a user list. We've got a user list here. Let's see how we can do something just a little bit more complicated and turn this into a billing report. So if I switch to echoing context, HTML, it's going to make a table. So we get 1 row for each user. So what have we got here? Connect to Composer, load our Composer classes, connect to the Comet server with our credentials, list the users, so with this PHP variable users, which has all those in it, start producing a display table, and then one table row for each user, and so I should get a nice little table out of that. Great, I do. Let's do something a little bit more here. So we've got 2 versions. Neat thing, the great thing about having all these classes is, all the information's right here in my editor. Because all classes are auto-generated from the documentation, the full documentation is available right here in my editor, and I can see immediately all the parameters, the method type, and go deep into objects. I'll show you that now. So we've got list users and also list users full, which gives you the whole user profiles. And let's say number of devices. Let's add a column for number of devices. Space this out a little to make it more consistent. So now we've got a full user profile for every user, and we can see all of the properties in a user profile. So there's the emails, things, whether or not they're suspended, the language, time zone, all their quota settings, policy settings, protected item and storage vault settings all in here too. So I'm just trying to make a number of devices column. So I'm going to look at the devices, and that's an array. So I can look at any device and information about each individual device. But what I'm going to do right now is just the number of devices. That's count in PHP. And so if I refresh that web page, I've got another column. And of course, these are all test devices that I created 10 minutes ago. So there's no devices on any of them, and I can, well, yes, that's correct. Another thing I could possibly do here, just in terms of things that you might be billing on, is maybe the current storage. So if you want to have a nice report that gives you the user, number of devices, current storage, let's do that. Current storage. New column. Okay, so in here we have to figure out the current storage for each user. Well, when we say storage, we're probably looking, Comet gives you measurements for the protected item. That's the size that the customer sees, files on disk. Before encryption, deduplication, retention, and then you've got the storage vault size, which is the size the MSP sees, so that's after deduplication, encryption, but also after retention. So it might be bigger, might be smaller, it's usually smaller. So we're going to look at the storage vault sizes here. What do we want this report to display if a customer has more than one storage vault? In this case, I'm just going to add them all together. So we're going to have a total storage vault size, starts off at 0, and then we look at each one of the customer's storage vaults. One thing, we said this API is going to be compatible forever, and we do mean that because it's terrible when code you wrote stops working because someone else or something. We're just never going to change this. That has some pros and cons. Obviously, the pros. Some cons, which is you have to know a little bit about the history of Comet. We used to call storage vaults destinations. Instead of protected item storage vaults, we had sources and destinations. I'm not going to make any judgment on whether those are better or worse names, but you do need to know that in the API it's called destinations for storage vaults. So for each destination, for each storage vault, now we can do things like look at the storage vault's properties, and there's a ton of storage vault properties, everything from their connection settings, their type, their description, whether it's FTP or low copy or S3 or whether it's been initialized, encryption stuff. We just want to look at the size. Oh, look, here's the quota, storage vault quota. So maybe we want to add a storage vault quota column. The size of a storage vault for its current storage. So we look, I'm just going to tell you where it is. That's the size of a storage vault, and we're going to add it to our total, and then we're going to display the total. And of course, for all of these example customers, it's 0. Sorry, I wish I had better sample data, but there we go. So current storage 0. Well, and that's 0 bytes. So let's make this a little bit more complicated. I just want to give you guys some idea of flexibility. You can do whatever you want here. Let's turn it into gigabytes. Total storage vault size gigabytes is the API gives it to you in bytes. So it's number of bytes divided by how many bytes there are in a byte. So we can now turn that into. So we've looked at every storage vault. We've taken the size of the storage vault, added it together. Now we divide it by the number of bytes in a gigabyte, and then we display the number of gigabytes, and of course it's still 0. One interesting thing here is that we have just added up all storage vaults, nothing specific to the type of storage vault. So, you know, a lot of you MSPs, you charge based on your storage, or maybe you're using cloud storage, Wasabi, Backblaze, Azure, SD. But at the same time, maybe the customer's also got, you know, maybe they're also doing a backup to an external hard drive, and you don't want to include that in this billing report. So let's filter out local path storage vaults here. So I want to filter out local path storage vaults. The way we do that is we just check the type. If the storage vault type, where's the type? There, type. If the storage vault type is local copy, then we want to skip it. How do we tell if that type is local copy? Well, there is a ton of convenient values for you in this def class. And this is all in the documentation as well. So here, oh, look, here we go, destination type. Oh, and look, you can see all the other types too. So maybe you only want to build for certain types. This is how you do it. I just want to check if it's local copy, then I'm going to skip it and just go look at the next storage vault. That's how that's done in PHP. If I refresh, of course, it's still 0 because this is great sample data. But yeah, and so we can keep doing this forever. I mean, maybe you want to build based on something else. Maybe you want to report some other field. But this is really just a super simple example, 50 lines of how you connect to the Comet server with the API and start producing a table report that's custom for your requirements. Let's move on to the next example, which is I wanted to produce a sign-up form. So fresh new file. And the first thing I need to do is just connect to my Comet server again. I'm just going to paste that from the previous file. Now a sign-up form. So let's just crack into it. So there's going to be an API. I said everything in the Comet server is API driven. So right now we can, you can go to the Comet server, hit the Add User button, add a user, look at the network inspector, and see what API calls it makes. That's one way of figuring it out. Or you can go to the documentation, search for Add User. You'll find the Add User API. Or you could just, if you're using this, then everything's auto completed. So I can just go in here and oh look, it's right here. Admin Add User. To add a user, we need to know the new user's username and password. Great. So let's build a little form that asks the user for a username and password, and then creates the account. So exiting PHP context, echo context. Start writing HTML. So here's a little form. I should be able to go to it in the browser. I'm just going to increase the size there, because I don't know if you guys are watching zoomed in. So we've got a sign up form, username, password, button. That's 3 lines of code or whatever. So method post means when the form is submitted, we're going to hit the same page again, but as a post request. So what I'm just going to do is, what I said before about Laravel Symfony frameworks. If you're writing PHP in a big application, it's going to look a little bit different to this. But I'm just, like I said, the simplest thing that could possibly work is if I just check. Inside this block here, we are in this submission kind of state. And these variables contain the things that were submitted inside this form. So what happens is load the composer classes. If this was a form submission, it's the first time you load the page, it's not a form submission, so just go and display the form. And when you submit the form, comes back, hits the web server again, now we're inside this block. And so here we've got the submitted username and password, and all I'm going to do is just call this add user API with the username and password. password. This API is exception based, so I'm going to put it all in a try catch. And so if we get to this point, the add user was successful. So let's just end the script with a little message saying you know, and you could redirect them to another page saying where to download the software or something. And if we failed to create the account, just display why we couldn't create it. So it's really basic. There's a bit more boilerplate on compared to the last example. We've got a lot of kind of PHP code going on, where the previous one we had pretty raw API stuff. But here, so we are basically just making one single API call, add user with these variables, and let's just try it out. So on my server right now, I've got test, test2, and test3, and if I go to the sign up form and I want to type in test4, password test4, sign up, your account was created, great. And if I go back to my Comet server and refresh, say, great, well, there's test4. I zoomed in too much and now I've got the mobile CSS showing, but yes, say test4. Great. Okay, so let's do a little bit more complicated stuff with sign up. So PHP, when we first loaded the sample code, you know, making an HTTP request in PHP was like 20 lines, and using our classes, that brought it down to 2 lines. It's a little bit, you know, the things that PHP does in 1 line versus the things that take, you know, a ton of lines. One thing that we can do in a single line is send an email. So a customer signs up, we want to send an email to the you know, the accounts department or to sales staff or something. 1 line. Mail, built into PHP. I want to send it to accounts at my company. Subject line, new sign up. Message body, customer, and then the username, just signed up. That's great, that's it. And now whenever anyone signs up, you get an email about it, 1 line. Of course, I'm running out of a terminal window. I don't have SMTP set up, so that's not going to work on my server. But you know, if you push this to your web server, it will. So I'm just going to comment that out for now. What else can we do? When someone signs up, for instance, maybe you want to change some stuff. Maybe you want to automatically configure their account a little bit. So if I just look at someone's account here, maybe you want to automatically set their language. Yeah, or maybe you want to automatically add an email address so everything gets BCC'd to you, or maybe you want to set a default policy. I think setting a default is kind of the obvious thing to look at here. So how's that? You know, there's an awful lot of things we could change about a user account, and this add user function here only takes, you know, user and password pretty much. You know, it doesn't take a million arguments for all the possible things you might want to do to an account. And so the way this works in Comet is after we create the account, what we then do is modify the account properties after it's been created. And so the way we do that is we get the user file, make any changes we want to it, and then resubmit it to the server. So for our newly created account, we're going to have a pretty blank user profile settings, right? So let's just get it from the server. And I just searched, here we go, admin get user profile. So we give it a username, and now we've got the user's profile. Here we make any changes we want, and then we just push our changed profile back to the server. And so in order to, so there's an admin get profile, here we go, admin set profile. And set profiles function takes 2 arguments. One is the username that we're trying to replace, and then one second thing is data profile. Now if I just make no changes, I'm sure that will work. Let's try the most basic change we could possibly make is adding an email address. So profile, it's so great having this class and everything just here in the editor. So I can see, oh, let's do something fun. All new accounts that get created are suspended. That's a bull, right? Yeah, it's a bull. it's a pretty contrived example, but maybe you want people to sign up freely, but then you need to manually approve them or something. Let's just see if this works, make sure I got everything right. So right now, the user we created last time, it's not suspended, but if I go to the sign up form, refresh the sign up form, we're up to test 5, test 5, sign up, and we successfully made it all the way through. If I refresh the page, and then, oh, great, so we've got the suspended user account. So that's the basic premise, how you modify new account settings. I'm going to show one more change that you might want to make, which is setting a default policy. So Comet Server, we have this policy system for all your policies. I've got one that I made yesterday while I was rehearsing this. So API webinar sample policy, you can see it's a pretty basic policy with not a lot of changes. The first thing to do is check the ID of that policy. So you hit the view button to toggle your optional columns, and you can see the ID of this policy. Copy the ID. When I'm modifying the account profile, so what we do is, add the new user account, get its profile settings. Now inside here we can make any changes we want, including setting the policy ID. And if I just look through this, I can see there's a policy ID. I'm just going to set it to that thing we copy pasted. I don't really need the suspended one. It wasn't a great demo. So now we're setting a policy, and let's try it out. Try the sign up form. Test is 6. We're up to 6 now. Yeah, 6. Sign up, successfully created account 6, and if we look at account 6, it has automatically been set to our policy. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I wanted to show off for now. Before we get into the questions, there's so many things you could do here. For instance, you could add a new, just muck around with all of the properties that are in here. Anything you want to change, it probably can be changed. Like I said, the Comet Server web interface is just using the same API, doing the exact same thing. So if there's something you can do in the Comet Server, you can do it through the API. Setting emails. One thing you might be interested in is adding new storage vaults. For instance, a lot of people are into direct-to-cloud backup, and so one thing you could do is you could use Composer to load in the the Amazon SDK or the Backblaze Wasabi SDK, use their functions to create a new bucket, and then use the functions in here to add a new adding a new kind of storage vault that points directly to a cloud location. And so you could have a sign-up form on your website. People go to, they get a direct-to-cloud with custom private bucket, so it's not sharing any credentials or anything like that. Anyways, there's so many options. Go nuts. There's yeah, I think I'll just leave it there and dive into some questions.
Cool. That was great. Thanks, Jason. So just to recap, what are the resources that are available? We've got documentation, got the Comet Git as well, and they can come back to you on tickets.
Yeah, of course. So we're really happy to support people using the API. Anything you build with the API, it's great for everyone, us and you. And so yeah, we're happy to help out in the tickets, technical support, even for other programming languages. And of course, you've got all the resources on our website, the sample code and the complete reference.
Okay. Question here: can we make the code that you've just written here as some example code? Can we put that on the Git that people can have a bit of a play with?
Sure. Yeah, we can put this online.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here, and I can still see some coming through here. There are some that are very specific customers, which will follow up directly after. So one here: can I use the server admin account with the API if I have TOTP enabled?
Fascinating question. The answer is yes. You probably don't want to. You would need to fill in your 6-digit as part of this PHP script. So I would recommend just creating a second user account for API stuff and give it a long randomly generated password. Sort of treat it as an API token instead.
Another one here, does the API support?
Yeah, of course. So I've, like I said, the Comet server is just using the same functions and methods. So I've got a demo Comet server that it's fresh here with no users, and by default we just HTTP. But of course, just change this to HTTPS if your Comet server is HTTPS. So yeah, of course, SSL is supported.
Another one here. Do you plan to provide an SDK for other languages other than PHP?
Yeah, definitely. So with the sample code, which is great, and that should be enough to easily let you get started in any programming language. I think having the full SDK just makes it a little bit easier to write more complicated applications with less code. And so we definitely want to extend that to other programming languages. I think probably PowerShell is top of the list at the moment, but basically we've got this auto-generation pipeline to keep the SDKs up to date. And so it's not really a matter of writing it, it's a matter of writing the code that writes the code. Yeah, and that's sort of the way we keep things up to date.
Briefly, but I think you're also pretty eager to start writing some code. Sort of have a discussion on the emphasis that we put on the API and why that was such an important part of Comet, and sort of what was the reason that let the guys here be a little bit behind the curtain, I suppose, as they have rationale for why we always wanted an API that was always up to date and fully comprehensive.
So Comet is, I guess, we have this sister company called MyClient, and MyClient spent a lot of time working with other backup products on the market, and sort of using their APIs and extending their functionality to support things like resale ports. And we had constant frustrations with the APIs for other backup products being behind, out of date. And we took all of that experience to build a better backup product with it that didn't have any of the same problems.
Yeah, autoload.php work with most web hosts?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the short answer is just another PHP file. If you look at my screen, it's created a ton of things because there's a lot of files in here. But yeah, the PHP files, you can just upload them. They work on any web host. Composer is a very normal thing to do nowadays, so your web host would definitely just work with it.
API be used to pull logs?
Yeah, totally. It doesn't really make sense to do it as a sign-up form or the report project, but I'll just quickly show you in here that there's, if I just scroll through the list of available functions, one of them is get job log. And you can do search, get reports for user, even custom search, and so yeah. All the information you need is in. If you can do it within the Comet server, you can do it with the API.
But for me, asking about would we set up a place or location where users and people can sort of share, discuss Comet. There's actually a feature request for this for a forum or something like that. I've replied to that. Might be worth a bit of a read through and seeing some of our considerations. I like the idea of it. It's just us getting around to the implementation, and there are obviously some questions around being able to resource to moderate it. And I'm mindful that there are some people that do want to participate in this, but they obviously don't want to have any of the company details or anything shared because it's a fully white label product. So we're sort of working through that at the moment. But it is something I would like to see quite early, because I appreciate there's a lot of people wanting to discuss code, and there's also a lot of people wanting to discuss integration products. Yeah, so that's sort of that's sort of my thoughts on it. So I just say feel free to add your comments to the forum post as a feature request in the feature voting, and yeah, look to seeing what we do. Okay, another question here asking if we're going to be looking at enhancing the admin interface, sort of as a general point next year, or we're sort of saying here's the API, enhance that yourselves. I can talk about that one as well. Next year, yeah, there's certainly we do have some quite big plans for improving the UI and also adding in more, I suppose, useful tools, metrics, and visualizations for you in the server interface. We've had a pretty busy year, and we have had some initial starts on those, but early sort of next year, and I'm a bit reluctant to give full timelines, but I would like to say the first half of next year, you should start to see some quite changes to the Comet interface and UI that should hopefully make using Comet a bit easier and a bit more friendly. Okay, just looking through the questions, there's a couple more that it's probably worth us just following up directly. So with that, we might end the API there. I think that's about on time that we were as well. Do feel free to send through any questions or anything other that you think about later via on email. This webinar will be available on our YouTube after this in the next couple of days. So we'll put it out there, and it also will notify everybody on email when this is available. Yeah, so that's sort of where we are. I think we will end it there. One more question I've got here: will you be adding an option to allow more rebranded clients, e.g., allowing resellers? Yes, the reseller system is something we are very keen to put in there. That you can obviously build out your environment, give your own sellers their own branded clients, and manage all of that within a single Comet server. So yes, certainly stay tuned on that. It's something we're very keen to get in there. Okay, we'll end it there. Thanks very much for joining us. It's been great to chat to you. I'm sure Mason's enjoyed writing some code. It's been good to see it here, and yeah, certainly do feel free to get in touch if there's anything more we can answer. Thanks very much. Cheers.